to Savage Kitchen. New year, pretty much the same me, but we're trying something different today. My mother, since I started this channel last summer, has been on me about coming up with a keto-friendly or low-sugar syrup alternative. So this is for you, Mom. Today, we're talking all about keto-friendly syrups. So a lot of the recipes that I've done here on Savage Kitchen include a simple syrup. Simple syrup is equal parts sugar and water, and then in a lot of my recipes, I tend to infuse them with either herbs or spices to change the flavor profile just a little bit. Super fun, super easy, but also super detrimental to somebody who is extremely sensitive to sugar, who may be diabetic, or may just be trying to stick to a keto diet for the new year. Whatever the case may be. Maybe they're trying to please their mother. So today we're going to be experimenting with 3 different sugar alternatives. I know I have 4 syrups in front of me. We'll get there. Stick with me. The 3 ingredients that we're trying are erythritol, allulose, and monk fruit. These are all available on Amazon, often in grocery stores or like a Whole Foods, or if you have like a Fresh Market or a Sprouts. But if you're like me and you have an Amazon buying problem, you can just order these on Amazon. I'll put links below. What I've done with each of these is I've turned them into a simple syrup. What's interesting is, depending on which you use, there are slightly different ratios that you need to do to get them to the right consistency. So we're going to start first with erythritol. Erythritol is something that it's been around for ages, and actually I learned was used to sweeten like protein powders and all sorts of health foods. The problem in using erythritol for a simple syrup is that depending on the ratio of sugar to water that you use, the erythritol will recrystallize after you store it. That's a problem. Nobody makes enough simple syrup for just one cocktail. You usually make a jar at a time, right? So what we've done here is instead of a 1-to-1 sugar to water ratio, we have done a 2-to-1 water to sugar ratio and added xanthan gum. The reason we're adding xanthan gum is that it will not change the flavor of your sweetener whatsoever, but it's going to change the mouthfeel. Syrup doesn't really have a watery consistency. It has a syrup consistency. It's a little bit thick. And to get the viscosity to match what we would have from a regular sugar to water ratio, we need to add xanthan gum. So for this particular syrup, I did 1/2 cup of erythritol, 1 cup of water, and a pinch of xanthan gum. Literally a pinch, like a quarter of a teaspoon. So now the granules on the erythritol are kind of thicker than your like regular sugar. Think more like it's almost like the granules are like the size of a kosher salt. They taste sweet like sugar, but it also tastes a little bit cooler than sugar. There's a slight cooling effect. I don't really know how else to describe it other than you have to try it, but to put it in your mouth and taste it, it's sweet, it tastes like sugar, but it's cooler than sugar is to the tongue. For a simple syrup, you can see that adding the xanthan gum really turned this into a lovely syrup consistency, and it stayed relatively clear, just like white sugar with water would. So let's taste this and see. Tastes pretty much like simple syrup. Flavor-wise, it might not be quite as sweet as sugar, but I think that the difference is negligible. And I made these 2 days ago when there has been no recrystallization of those granules. So this is just plain erythritol with water and a pinch of xanthan gum. Next, we have a combination of monk fruit and erythritol. The reason I'm doing a combination of these two is because if you look for these alternative sweeteners in the store, most often you're actually going to find a combination. It's actually a little bit harder to find pure erythritol or pure allulose. Usually it's going to say something like monk fruit with erythritol or monk fruit with allulose, which is going to be the next thing that we try. So I wanted to try just the purely erythritol on its own and then the monk fruit with erythritol to see if there's any bit of difference. Monk fruit is something that's been included in Asian cooking forever, and now is gaining popularity as people shy away from sugar a little bit. So Granule wise on this one, they look a little bit more crystal-like, for lack of a better term. It has the same cooling effect that the erythritol has, but it's good. Like, it tastes like sugar. Can't go wrong. Now, same thing with the plain erythritol. I added xanthan gum to this syrup to make sure that we get that same syrup consistency. And the reason that consistency is important in a cocktail is because the things that you add to a cocktail, whether it's a liqueur or alcohol or milk or syrup or whatever it is, all of those contribute to the mouthfeel. So when I'm adding syrup to a drink, I want it to have the same mouthfeel as syrup. So let's taste this. Again, tastes like simple syrup. I see no problem with this. I think this would be a great alternative if you're trying to stay away from white refined sugar. The monk fruit with erythritol is fine. So next up we have allulose. Allulose is a little bit newer on the scene as far as availability and articles about it and recipes using it. Allulose is also plant-based, and interestingly, with allulose, because it is more closely related to fructose as an actual compound, you don't have the same issue with recrystallization that you have with erythritol. So with allulose, you can use this genuinely as a one-to-one sugar substitute without worrying about all of those crystals reforming and the syrup basically breaking. So in this case, we did a 1 cup of water to 1 cup of allulose ratio, and no xanthan gum in this one to thicken it up, although it is a little bit thinner than a regular simple syrup. Let's give this a taste. That tastes exactly what I expect simple syrup to taste like. It doesn't have the cooling effect that the erythritol has. Yeah, that tastes to me almost identical to simple syrup. I think you'd have a really hard time telling the difference. It's just as sweet. The mouthfeel is similar. If you wanted a thicker syrup, you could add a pinch of xanthan gum to this when making your syrup. But yeah, that tastes just like simple syrup. The color is different. If it's really going to bother you that it's not white or clear, it has a little golden hue to it, then maybe go with the erythritol. But flavor-wise, I think so far the pure allulose wins. So our final syrup is monk fruit with allulose. And the reason that I got the combination of monk fruit with allulose is because pure allulose by itself was actually a little bit harder to find, and it was definitely more expensive. So if you can find something that's a little bit less expensive, like a monk fruit with erythritol or an allulose with monk fruit, that might be better than spending a ton of money on just pure allulose. So let's give this a stir too. So that's interesting. So this one definitely has the viscosity of a syrup without having added xanthan gum. Let's give this a taste. But you can definitely taste a difference between the pure allulose and the allulose with monk fruit. It's still very sweet. There's no discernible odor difference. It's good, but it doesn't. Allulose tastes purely like sugar, where the allulose with monk fruit, slightly different. It tastes closer to the erythritol syrups, but doesn't necessarily have the same cooling effect. Interesting. All right, well, for my money and my blood sugar, I would say if flavor is your primary concern, I would stick with allulose. I think that if mouthfeel is a concern, if you want your syrup to be a little thicker and more syrupy, add a pinch of xanthan gum. As you're boiling your cup of water, cup of sugar, the tiniest little pinch is going to thicken that up a lot. If color is a concern when you're building a cocktail, because believe me, I really do think the aesthetic of a cocktail adds to the drinking experience, erythritol is definitely the way to go. This still tastes delicious. Like, don't get me wrong, these are all good substitutes for sugar, My personal preference is the allulose, but for color and clarity and look, the erythritol probably would be the way to go, purely for aesthetic reasons. Also, infused simple syrups are possible with all of these. Just treat it like your regular simple syrup, and if you want to add herbs or spices while you're simmering your ingredients together, it's going to behave in the same way. So like, go to town, have fun with this. Personally, I think I'm going to try and make some candied ginger with the allulose, because I think it's going to be really, really good. So stick around, more cocktails on the way, and now they can be keto friendly. Cheers, friends.